For 1,000 of years of human existence, every living movement that ever occurred on Earth vanished into nothingness the very instant it happened. A bird taking flight, a child taking its first steps, a running horse, or the fleeting expression on a loved one's face existed only in the present moment, surviving solely as an imperfect, fading memory in the human mind. For millennia, our ancestors created paintings, stone sculptures, and drawings to capture the world, but these art forms were frozen in absolute stillness. Even when humanity finally invented photography in the early 19th century AD, capturing reality on polished silver and glass plates, the images remained stubbornly motionless, preserving only a single silent slice of frozen time. Yet, deep within the human imagination, there was an insatiable desire to make pictures move. Humans wanted to recreate life itself, to trap the continuous flow of time inside a machine and replay it at will. The invention of the motion picture camera was not the sudden breakthrough of a single lone inventor, but a thrilling scientific race that spanned centuries, continents, and disciplines. It required ancient optical discoveries, 19th century AD neurophysiology, chemical breakthroughs in flexible plastics, high-speed shutter mechanics, and fierce rivalries between visionary geniuses, tragic pioneers, and industrial titans. To understand how a motion picture camera works, one must first understand a profound biological fact. Motion pictures do not actually move. The human eye and brain are the ultimate accomplices in one of the greatest optical illusions in science. When you watch a movie, you are not seeing continuous motion. You are staring at a rapid sequence of completely static, motionless photographs flashed before your eyes in rapid succession, separated by tiny moments of complete darkness. This optical illusion relies on two intertwined neurological and psychological mechanisms: persistence of vision and the phi phenomenon. In 1824 AD, the Anglo-Swiss physician Peter Mark Rojek presented a landmark paper to the Royal Society of London on the persistence of vision. He explained that when light strikes the human retina, the neurological signal does not disappear instantly when the light is removed. Instead, the chemical receptors in the retina retain the visual impression for approximately 1/10th to 1/20th of a 1 second. Decades later, psychologists and neuroscientists identified the phi phenomenon and beta movement, which describe how the human visual cortex processes sequential visual data. When the human brain detects a series of still images depicting incremental stages of an action, presented at a rate faster than roughly 10 to 12 frames per 1 second, it automatically fills in the temporal gaps, blending the discrete static images into the smooth perception of continuous, fluid motion. Long before anyone had cameras or photosensitive chemicals, 19th century AD scientists and toy makers began exploiting this neurological phenomenon using hand-drawn illustrations. In 1825 AD, English physician John Ayrton Paris popularized the Thaumatrope, a simple cardboard disc with a picture on each side, such as a bird on one face and an empty cage on the other. When twirled rapidly by two pieces of string, the two static drawings blended together in the viewer's eye, making the bird appear trapped inside the cage. In 1832 AD, Belgian physicist Joseph Plateau took the concept vastly further by inventing the Phenakistiscope. Plateau mounted a series of sequential drawings around the edge of a flat cardboard disc with narrow radial slits cut between each drawing. When a user spun the disc in front of a mirror and looked through the moving slits, the slits acted as a mechanical shutter, briefly exposing each successive drawing at the exact same spatial position. For the first time in human history, viewers watched a drawn figure dance, jump, or run in a continuous visual loop. Around the exact same time in Vienna, Austrian geometry professor Simon Stampfer independently invented a nearly identical device called the stroboscope. In 1834 AD, English mathematician William George Horner eliminated the need for a mirror by creating the Zoetrope, or Wheel of Life. Horner placed a paper strip of sequential drawings inside a spinning open-topped metal cylinder with vertical viewing slits cut into its sides, allowing multiple people to gather around and watch moving animations simultaneously. In 1877 AD, French science teacher Charles-Émile Reynaud perfected the optical toy by inventing the Praxinoscope. Reynaud replaced the crude viewing slits of the Zoetrope with an inner circle of angled mirrors located at the center of the cylinder. As the drums spun, the mirrors reflected each drawing directly to the viewer's eye without distortion or dimming, producing a bright, remarkably clear moving picture. By 1892 AD, Reynaud had expanded this into the théâtre optique, a massive projection system that used long, flexible bands of hand-painted, transparent gelatin plates to project 15-minute animated stories to paying audiences in Paris. Yet, despite their brilliance, all of these early optical devices shared one fundamental limitation. They relied entirely on hand-drawn art. An artist had to painstakingly imagine and illustrate each tiny increment of movement by hand. If humanity was ever going to capture the true chaotic reality of the living world, moving images had to be wedded to the power of photography. The problem was that photography in the mid-19th century AD was painfully slow. When Louis Daguerre introduced the daguerreotype in 1839 AD, exposures took up to 30 minutes in bright sunlight. By the 1850s AD, Frederick Scott Archer's wet collodion glass plate process had slashed exposure times to a few seconds, but the glass plates had to be coated, sensitized, exposed in the camera, and developed in a darkroom within minutes before the collodion dried. Taking sequential photographs of fast-moving objects was chemically and mechanically impossible. The chemical revolution that unlocked motion picture photography arrived in 1871 AD, when English physician Richard Leach Maddox invented the gelatin dry plate. Maddox suspended light-sensitive silver bromide crystals in a warm solution of animal gelatin, coating the mixture onto glass plates that could be dried and stored for months before use. In 1878 AD, English photographer Charles Harper Bennett discovered that heating the gelatin emulsion for several days dramatically increased its sensitivity to light. Suddenly, photographic exposures dropped from several seconds down to 1/1000th of a 1 second. For the first time, a camera could freeze high-speed motion with absolute clarity. The chemical barrier had been broken. All that remained was to build a machine capable of firing these rapid exposures in sequence. The catalyst that launched the motion picture revolution occurred not in a university physics laboratory, but on a horse racetrack in California in 1872 AD. Leland Stanford, the fabulously wealthy railroad tycoon, former governor of California, and founder of Stanford University, owned a massive breeding farm of champion racehorses in Palo Alto. Stanford was obsessed with horse locomotion and became embroiled in a fierce debate with equestrian enthusiasts. The central question was simple yet hotly contested. When a horse is galloping at full speed, is there a moment when all 4 hooves leave the ground simultaneously? Human vision was far too slow to resolve the rapid blur of a galloping horse's legs. Classical painters for hundreds of years had depicted galloping horses in the rocking horse position, with their front legs stretched far forward and their hind legs stretched far backward. Stanford believed that a galloping horse was airborne, but with its legs tucked beneath its belly. Determined to settle the debate with objective photographic proof, Stanford hired one of the most skilled landscape photographers in the American West, Eadweard Muybridge. Eadweard Muybridge was an eccentric, visionary English-born photographer who had earned international fame capturing stunning panoramic views of Yosemite Valley and San Francisco. When Stanford first approached him in 1872 AD, Muybridge was skeptical that photography was fast enough, but he accepted the challenge. His initial attempts with wet collodion plates yielded only faint silhouettes, and the project was temporarily halted when Muybridge was put on trial for the murder of his wife's lover, a trial that ended in his acquittal on grounds of justifiable homicide. In 1877 AD, Muybridge returned to Stanford's Palo Alto farm with advanced high-speed gelatin chemistry and a bold engineering concept. Muybridge realized that no single camera in existence could advance glass plates quickly enough to capture a running horse. Therefore, he decided to use multiple cameras operating in sequence. Along the edge of the Palo Alto racetrack, Muybridge constructed a long wooden shed housing a battery of 12 and later 24 high-precision stereoscopic cameras, each fitted with rapid drop shutters powered by heavy rubber bands and electromagnetic release latches. Opposite the camera battery, he erected a massive 50-foot-long white wooden backdrop marked with numbered vertical grid lines. Across the track, Muybridge stretched 24 thin tripwires made of fine thread, each connected to an electrical circuit. In June of 1878 AD, Stanford's prized trotting horse named Occident, and later a galloping mare named Sally Gardner, raced down the track at 40 feet per 1 second. As the horse sped past the shed, its chest and legs snapped the tripwires one by one. Each broken wire completed an electrical circuit that triggered an electromagnet, instantly releasing the spring-loaded shutter of the corresponding camera. The resulting sequence of 24 crystal-clear photographs, published worldwide under the title Sally Gardner at a Gallop, made international scientific history. The photographs provided irrefutable proof. There is indeed a split 1 second during a gallop when all 4 hooves leave the ground simultaneously, but the hooves are tucked inwards underneath the horse's abdomen, completely shattering centuries of incorrect artistic convention. Muybridge did not stop at simply publishing still photographs. In 1879 AD, he invented the Praxinoscope, a sophisticated projection device that combined his photographic sequences with the principle of the Phenakistiscope. Muybridge traced his sequential photographs onto the outer rim of large, rotating glass discs. When spun inside a specialized magic lantern projector equipped with a counter-rotating slotted shutter, the images of the galloping horse sprang to life on a giant screen before stunned audiences. In 1881 AD and 1882 AD, Muybridge embarked on a triumphant lecture tour of Europe, presenting his moving projections to the French Academy of Sciences in Paris and the Royal Society in London. Among the captivated scientists sitting in the audience in Paris was a prominent French physiologist named Étienne Jules Marey. Marey was a professor at the Collège de France who had dedicated his life to studying the mechanical laws of animal and human movement, including blood circulation, heartbeats, insect flight, and bird locomotion. Marey was deeply inspired by Muybridge's work, but as a rigorous scientist, he identified a fundamental flaw in Muybridge's multi-camera methodology. Marey pointed out that using 24 separate cameras spread along a 50-foot track did not capture continuous motion from a fixed perspective. Instead, Each camera viewed the subject from a slightly different angle and spatial viewpoint, introducing parallax errors. Furthermore, tripwires could not be used to study the free flight of a wild bird in the open sky. Murray realized that what science truly needed was a single camera with a single optical lens, capable of taking multiple rapid exposures on a single photographic plate through one optical viewpoint. Murray looked for inspiration in astronomical instruments. In 1874 AD, French astronomer Pierre Janssen had built the revolver photographique, an astronomical camera shaped like a cylinder that used a clockwork motor to rotate a circular daguerreotype plate, capturing 48 sequential images of the transit of the planet Venus across the face of the Sun. Drawing on Janssen's concept, Murray engineered one of the most famous devices in the history of technology, the fusil photographique, or photographic gun, in 1882 AD. Shaped exactly like a double-barreled hunting rifle, Murray's photographic gun was a self-contained handheld chronophotographic camera. The barrel of the gun housed a high-speed telephoto lens, while the breech contained an octagonal glass dry plate driven by a precise clockwork spring mechanism and a circular rotary shutter. When Murray aimed the gun at a flying seagull and pulled the trigger, the clockwork mechanism spun the circular shutter at high speed, while an intermittent escapement mechanism advanced the glass plate through 12 separate stops in exactly 1 second. Each exposure lasted just 0.720th of a 1 second. When developed, the single octagonal glass plate contained 12 distinct sequential photographs arranged in a circle, freezing every intricate flap of the bird's wings with mathematical precision. Murray's photographic gun was the world's first single-lens camera capable of capturing high-speed sequential motion. Murray went on to establish the Station Physiologique in Paris, where he photographed athletes, gymnasts, and animals against dark black velvet backdrops, dressing human runners in tight black suits painted with bright white lines along their limbs to produce striking geometric diagrams of pure biomechanical motion. Yet Murray quickly encountered an insurmountable physical barrier: rigid glass plates. A circular glass plate could hold at most 12 to 24 frames before running out of surface area. If a glass plate was made large enough to hold hundreds of images, it became impossibly heavy, fragile, and prone to shattering under the violent acceleration of rapid mechanical movement. In 1888 AD, Murray built a new chronophotographic camera that utilized a long roll of sensitized paper ribbon, capturing sequences of up to 40 images at 20 frames per 1 second. But paper was opaque, easily torn by mechanical sprockets, and its fibrous texture degraded image projection. True motion picture recording required a continuous, flexible, transparent ribbon that could be wound tightly onto reels. That miracle material was celluloid. The origins of synthetic plastic dated back to 1856 AD, when English chemist Alexander Parkes created Parkesine from cellulose nitrate. In 1869 AD, American inventor John Wesley Hyatt developed celluloid by dissolving cellulose nitrate in camphor, creating a tough, moldable thermoplastic. In May of 1887 AD, Hannibal Goodwin, an Episcopal minister and amateur photographer from Newark, New Jersey, filed a patent for flexible nitrocellulose photographic film. Meanwhile, in Rochester, New York, George Eastman and his chemist Henry Reichenbach at the Eastman Dry Plate and Film Company perfected a commercial manufacturing process in 1889 AD for continuous, transparent rolls of celluloid film coated with gelatin silver bromide emulsion. Celluloid was lightweight, crystal clear, flexible, and possessed immense tensile strength, capable of withstanding the rapid mechanical pulling required inside a high-speed camera mechanism. With flexible film now emerging, the race to build the first true motion picture camera reached a fever pitch across Europe and North America. Among the earliest and most tragic pioneers was a French artist, chemist, and engineer named Louis-Aimé Augustin Leprince. Born in Metz, France, in 1841 AD, Leprince grew up visiting the studio of his father's close friend, Louis Daguerre. Working in his workshop at 160 Woodhouse Lane in Leeds, England, Leprince designed and constructed a revolutionary single-lens motion picture camera and projector in 1888 AD. The camera featured a single brass lens, a clockwork-driven intermittent pull-down mechanism, a rotating shutter, and two spools feeding ribbons of sensitized paper and transparent celluloid. In October of 1888 AD, in the sunlit garden of his in-laws' home at Roundhay in Leeds, Leprince pointed his single-lens camera at his family. His son, Adolphe, his mother-in-law, Sarah Whitley, his father-in-law, Joseph Whitley, and a family friend walked and twirled in a playful circle. Leprince cranked the camera at approximately 12 frames per 1 second, capturing roughly 2 seconds of movement. Known today as the Roundhay Garden scene, this tiny strip of sequential film is universally recognized as the oldest surviving motion picture sequence in human history. Days later, Leprince filmed traffic crossing Leeds Bridge, capturing horse-drawn omnibuses and pedestrians crossing the River Aire. Leprince had achieved what no human before him had accomplished. He had built a single-lens motion picture camera, loaded it with flexible film, and captured living scenes from reality. By the summer of 1890 AD, Leprince was preparing to unveil his invention to the world with a public demonstration in New York City. In September of 1890 AD, he traveled to France to settle personal affairs before sailing to America. On September 16, 1890 AD, Leprince boarded a train from Bourges to Dijon, planning to connect to Paris. He was never seen again. When the train arrived in Paris, Leprince, his luggage, and his blueprints had completely vanished from his compartment. Despite exhaustive international police investigations, no trace of Louis Leprince was ever found, leaving his family heartbroken and the field wide open for his commercial competitors. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in West Orange, New Jersey, Thomas Alva Edison turned his formidable industrial resources toward motion pictures. In 1888 AD, having conquered the phonograph and the incandescent light bulb, Edison filed a caveat with the United States Patent Office, declaring his intent to create an instrument that would do for the eye what the phonograph had done for the ear. While Edison conceived the commercial vision, the engineering genius who designed, built, and perfected the camera was his brilliant 28-year-old Scottish-English assistant, William Kennedy Laurie Dixon. Working inside Room 5 of Edison's West Orange laboratory, Dixon initially experimented with microphotographs arranged spirally on cylinders, but soon abandoned the approach after Edison returned from Paris in 1889 AD with news of Maret's flexible film experiments. Dixon ordered long strips of newly invented 70mm celluloid film from George Eastman and made 3 foundational engineering decisions that established the technical standards of cinema for over a century. First, Dixon slit the 70mm film down the middle lengthwise, creating strips exactly 35mm wide, which became the universal global standard. Second, Dixon cut 4 rectangular perforations, or sprocket holes, on both sides of each frame so that toothed sprockets could pull the film with zero mechanical slippage. Third, Dixon incorporated a Geneva drive intermittent motion mechanism to stop the film rock steady for 1/30th of a 1 second during exposure, then advance it while a rotary disc shutter blocked the light. By 1891 AD, Dickson had completed the world's first fully functional, electrically driven motion picture camera, the kinetograph. The kinetograph was a heavy machine weighing hundreds of pounds, powered by an electric motor and capturing images at 30 to 40 frames per 1 second on 35mm film. In May of 1891 AD, Dickson demonstrated test footage, Dickson greeting, showing himself bowing and waving his hat to visiting club members. To produce films, Edison and Dickson built the world's first movie studio in 1893 AD, the Black Maria. Covered in black tar paper, the building was mounted on a circular railroad track that rotated 360 degrees to follow the sun, with a retractable roof that opened to flood the stage with natural light. Inside the Black Maria, Dickson filmed Fred Ott's sneeze in 1894 AD, along with sharpshooter Annie Oakley, boxer James J. Corbett, and strongman Eugen Sandow. However, Edison made a major strategic error. He refused to project films onto large screens, believing that individual coin-operated peep show cabinets would generate vastly more hardware sales. In 1894 AD, Edison commercialized the Phenakistiscope, a 4-foot-tall wooden cabinet where a single viewer looked through a magnifying eyepiece at a continuous 50-foot loop of 35-meter film illuminated by an electric bulb and spinning shutter. The first kinetoscope parlor opened on Broadway in New York City in April of 1894 AD to massive public acclaim. But the kinetoscope was limited to one viewer at a time, and the heavy kinetograph camera could not leave the studio. Crucially, Edison had neglected to patent his machines in Europe, opening the door for overseas inventors to inspect and improve his technology. In the summer of 1894 AD, Antoine Lumière, head of a major photographic manufacturing company in Lyon, France, saw an Edison kinetoscope in Paris. Antoine immediately recognized that moving pictures belonged on a large screen before a collective audience. He returned to Lyon and challenged his two sons, Auguste and Louis Lumière, to build a lightweight machine that could capture and project motion pictures. The Lumière family already produced over 15,000 high-speed gelatin dry plates annually, giving them world-class expertise in photochemistry. Auguste managed business operations, while Louis, a brilliant physicist and mechanic, tackled the machine's design. In the winter of 1894 AD, while recovering from an illness, Louis Lumière found inspiration in the feed dog mechanism of a domestic sewing machine. Louis designed an eccentric cam-driven dual-claw mechanism. Two hardened steel pins entered the perforations on either side of the 35mm film strip, pulled the film down exactly 1 frame height, retracted smoothly, and moved upward while the film rested motionless in the gate during exposure. Because the claw gripped the film for only a fraction of its cycle, the film remained stationary for fully 2/3 of each frame interval, providing extraordinary optical stability. Louis patented this invention on February 13, 1895 AD as the cinematographe. The cinematographe was a masterpiece of mechanical elegance and miniaturization. While Edison's kinetograph weighed hundreds of pounds and required heavy electric power, the cinematographe was an ultra-lightweight wooden box weighing only 5 kilograms, operated entirely by a hand crank. It was an ingenious 3-in-1 device. By day, a portable field camera, in the darkroom, an optical contact printer, and at night, when fitted with an arc lamp, a brilliant projector. Furthermore, Louis Lumière recognized that Edison's 40 frames per 1 second wasted expensive film. He standardized a recording speed of 16 frames per 1 second, which became the global standard for silent cinema for the next 30 years. On March 19, 1895 AD, Louis Lumière filmed workers leaving the Lumière factory outside their Lyon plant. The defining milestone in cinema history arrived on December 28, 1895 AD, in the Salon Indien basement of the Grand Café on Boulevard des Capucines in Paris. The Lumière brothers presented the world's first commercial public screening of projected motion pictures to 33 paying patrons. The program included 10 short films featuring workers leaving the Lumière factory, Baby's Breakfast, and The Water Are Watered, cinema's first narrative comedy. When the Lumière later screened the arrival of a train at La Ciotat, showing a massive locomotive roaring diagonally towards the camera, terrified audience members reportedly ducked under their seats, believing the train would burst through the wall. The Paris premiere was an explosive triumph. Within weeks, 1,000s queued daily, and the Lumière dispatched trained camera operators across Tokyo, Cairo, New York, Moscow, and Sydney. Meanwhile, other pioneers contributed vital innovations. In Berlin, Max and Emil Skladanowski showcased their dual-strip bioscope at the Wintergarten in November of 1895 AD. In London, instrument maker Robert W. Paul and photographer Burt Akers built the Paul Akers camera in 1895 AD to supply British film machines. Among the audience at the Lumière premiere was theatrical illusionist Georges Méliès. When Antoine Lumière refused to sell him a cinematograph, Méliès built his own camera from projector parts. In the autumn of 1896 AD, while filming Street Traffic at the Place de l'Opéra in Paris, Méliès's camera jammed for a few seconds before resuming. When he developed the film, an omnibus appeared to transform instantly into a hearse, and pedestrians vanished into thin air. Méliès had discovered the substitution splice and jump cut. He transformed the motion picture camera from a passive recording tool into an engine of visual magic, inventing double exposures, split screens, and time-lapse effects, culminating in his 1902 AD masterpiece, A Trip to the Moon. Concurrently, Alice Guy Blaché at Gaumont wrote and directed The Cabbage Fairy in 1896 AD, the first narrative fiction film, going on to pioneer synchronized sound discs and direct over 1,000 films. As the motion picture camera matured into an industrial instrument, machinists perfected its internal anatomy. The journey of a 35mm celluloid film strip begins in the Light Type magazine, where raw rolls of up to 1,000 feet sit on feed spindles. To prevent the violent start-and-stop jerking of the intermittent claw from snapping long, heavy film reels, American inventor Woodville Latham patented the Latham loop in 1895 AD. Latham introduced continuously rotating sprockets before and after the gate, leaving slack loops of loose film above and below the intermittent movement. The upper Latham loop absorbed the violent pull of the claw, while the lower loop isolated the gate from the take-up spool, enabling full-length feature films. At the film gate, a spring-loaded pressure plate holds the film flat against the focal plane within a tolerance of 1/1000th of an inch. The intermittent claw advances the film 16 to 24 times every 1 second, while fixed registration pins in studio cameras like the 1912 AD Bell & Howell 2709 lock the film in absolute registration during exposure to eliminate image jitter. Synchronized with the claw is a spinning 180-degree rotary disc shutter. The solid blade blocks light while the film moves, and the open sector exposes the stationary frame to focused light from the lens for roughly 1/148th of a 1 second. On the chemical level, light striking the gelatin emulsion dislodges electrons from silver halide crystals, attracting positive silver ions that form microscopic clusters of pure metallic silver. This invisible latent image is subsequently developed in an alkaline bath into black metallic silver grains, while unexposed crystals are cleared by a fixer bath to produce a permanent negative. Throughout the 20th century AD, the camera continued to evolve. In 1927 AD, synchronized sound in the jazz singer standardized camera speeds at an unvarying 24 frames per 1 second, requiring soundproof camera blimps to silence mechanical gears. In the 1930s AD, 3-strip Technicolor cameras split light with optical prisms to expose 3 synchronized film strips through color filters. In 1937 AD, the Araflex 35 introduced a rotating 45-degree mirror shutter that bounced the lens image directly into a reflex viewfinder eyepiece, allowing operators to see exact focus and framing in real time. Lightweight handheld cameras empowered documentary filmmakers, war correspondents, and French New Wave directors to take cinema into the streets. In the late 20th century AD and early 21st century AD, digital image sensors replaced chemical celluloid. Following the 1969 AD invention of the charge-coupled device at Bell Laboratories, digital cinema cameras from Sony, ARRI and ARRI replaced film strips with high-resolution CMOS sensors containing 1,000 and 1,000 unions of photodiodes, converting photons directly into digital ones and zeros. Yet the essential soul of the motion picture camera remains unchanged from the wooden boxes of Le Prince, Dixon, and the Lumiere brothers. How did humans invent the motion picture camera? It was the culmination of 1,000 of years of human curiosity. It required ancient thinkers to understand the straight path of light, 19th century AD physiologists to decode persistence of vision, photographers to freeze a galloping horse with tripwires, chemists to synthesize flexible celluloid, tragic pioneers to chase their visions across continents, and master mechanics to adapt the claw of a sewing machine to advance a ribbon of light. Together, they gave humanity the power to freeze time, preserve our shared memories, and project our living dreams across the dark screens of the world forever.